Your thoughts tonight?
Yeah, I think it's important that there's accountability here. I understand that there's criticism, for example, where Republicans say this is a slippery slope, that they would possibly do the same in the future when they have a majority. But I'll tell you what the real slippery slope is here, in my opinion, is a sitting congresswoman who has repeatedly violated federal law, mind you, by threatening to assassinate the Speaker of the House. It's not like there's no precedent for this. Elected officials there is a history of elected officials shooting and killing other elected officials throughout U.S. history. This is a very serious matter. This is not just like they had some opinion that we didn't agree with. This is about literally the safety of our democracy and the people that work within it. And I'm glad that there's some form of accountability here, although I would prefer that they resign. And we're actually working on that right now. And if people would like to help support our petition that's gotten over 250,000 signatures for that, they can text resign to 954-954. Again, they can text resign to 954-954.
How did you come to learn about her during a little bit of the interaction we just showed? And what did you think or feel, if you'll share with us, when you saw that she was not only a candidate, but a rising one, getting the nomination and then winning?
I don't even know what to say with that. For a while, I was just trying to block it out. I try not to think about those people because she is certainly not the only person that has done that. There have been many, many people that have recorded me in that manner. It's just this time that they got elected to Congress. And frankly, when that video was being taken, for example, what I was thinking about wasn't so much myself. It was the safety of my staff and friends that I was around. There was this woman chasing us. Many of the people that I worked with, including myself, of course, were about 18 years old or 19 years old at the time. There was a woman chasing us, essentially threatening us with a gun, for advocating for gun control. And, say what you want. You may not agree with me on everything, but there is nothing that can justify threatening people that are just barely older than minors with a gun because you don't agree with them in the first place. It's just fundamentally wrong. And ultimately, it's just unfortunate, really, because I want to see bipartisan action around gun violence. Bullets don't discriminate. People are dying in red states and blue states across the country. And every state is bleeding out at this point. And I want to see bipartisan action. But when people like Marjorie Taylor Greene do stuff like that, it makes it incredibly hard. But I will say I'm thankful to Republicans like my father that have spoken out and, have resigned from the Republican Party in disgust because they realize that, kids like I was at the time of the shooting deserve more protection than a weapon like the AR-15.
And you've unfortunately, as you explained, you and folks you've been around have been drawn in closer to this. And I think this is important because people are still learning. That's what the news is. We get information. Some of it's new, and we try to make sense of it. And as I think there was a time earlier where some of this stuff was more commonly minimized or dismissed, and not always for bad faith reasons, but people just thought, well, that's really fringe, or who really believes that? Or the most recent Borat movie looked at people who were maybe tricked into conspiracy theories, and it was almost absurdist. And in some cases, it may just be that. But in your case and in these others that we're tracking, it's quite serious. So I wonder if you could just share a little more of the point you're making, that you were brought in, I think, closer to the real world consequence of these kind of hateful conspiracies because people go out and do real things in response to these hateful lies online.
I think we've seen one of the most remarkable and truly, honestly, a horrific change in the Republican Party over the past, 30 years. I would say it really started in the 90s, but you could even go back to the primary of Barry Goldwater and the new conservative movement, way back in the 20th century, as I study in my history classes in college. But it's scary. It's really scary because people used to think, they're mostly a group of good people that truly, want what's best for the country. And yeah, there's a fringe of people that may or may not be white supremacists, but that's a very small minority of people. But now what we're seeing is there are actual conspiracy theorists and white supremacists that are becoming the party. And the fringe are those people that were originally, believed to be the majority. And it's truly terrifying because it's, what if we were, what happens in an instance How are we supposed to get along as a country? We can't even get the things done that we do agree on. There are, so many homeless people across the country right now. Kids are dying every day from gun violence. Why can we not just stop getting at each other's throats and just focus on helping the American people? That's the frustrating thing to me.
And before I lose you, the last thing we did want to show is new reporting here from the House floor. Congresswoman Lucy McBath, her son Jordan Davis, was shot and killed in gun violence in 2012. She spoke out here about the vote and these school shootings.
This is about a member stalking the children of tragedy, attacking survivors, and threatening violence. This is about a member denying the existence of dead children at Sandy Hook Elementary and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Just thought we'd get your response and reflections on that moment just tonight on the floor.
I think it's incredibly powerful, and I am so thankful to the Congresswoman for her strength that she's shown me, as a survivor that's able to be in Congress and work through so much. And you got to think that, people like Congresswoman Lucy McBath are people too. This stuff has got to affect them, even if they don't necessarily show it. And with that, I just wanted to highlight as my last thing that the most frustrating thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene is the people that we're not talking about right now that are affected by gun violence on a daily basis, predominantly in Black and brown communities that face massive amounts of systemic racism, poverty, and injustice that plays into so much gun violence in this country, because those are the people that really need the attention, because they're the ones that are hurting most right now.
David Hogg gets the final word on this piece of our special coverage. I want to thank you for joining us. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.